Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're putting a little bit of a different spin on our typical Monday morning trade episodes, where if you've been around here on the channel for a while now, if you haven't been, feel free to click that subscribe button and join the SFS community today. But usually we post either 5 must-buy running backs and wide receivers or some fashion of a buy low episode for those two respective positions. But today, based on the outcomes of Week 8 and how those Sunday games played out, we don't necessarily feel that there is terribly large amounts of opportunity to go out and make legitimate trade offers for players that we like here at the SFS channel, because so many of them played well and really met their expectations for what we expect them to do long term this season. So we actually felt that you would most likely have to overpay in most situations to get the vast majority of these players, again, that we've typically put in these episodes or would like to target for our teams long term. So today we've done a little bit of mashing together here. We've got running backs and wide receivers in addition to a quarterback trade target as well, because again, the list of players that we like long term for your teams this season that didn't produce was very small. So we're going to edit the video a little bit. We didn't want to just cram together an episode filled with players that we don't have confidence in long term just because you can buy low for them. So we'll be talking about those players that we do have faith in and like the rest of this year. So with that being said, let's hit the intro and get straight in to our first trade target here in Week 9. Alrighty, so as we mentioned in the intro of today's episode, we tried our best not to include players on this list today that would be unrealistic for you to go out and acquire, because again, so many of those players had exceptional Week 8 performances. So we tried to, not that these are necessarily all buy low candidates, because some of these players still command significant weight in the fantasy trade market. But again, these are players that are realistic acquires in most leagues, depending on the trade culture that you guys have going on in your respective fantasy leagues. So Jaylen Waddle is the first player up today that I absolutely love and really didn't meet expectations in this Week 8 performance. Throughout the collective body of work he's got this season, in addition to what he potentially could have done here in Week 8 and how we project him to move forward here the rest of the season, I think this is a good value buy right now. And again, with a player of his talent, his play styles, and potential ability to produce in a multitude of ways, I really like the way that forecasts him and projects him out for the remainder of this fantasy season. Now, there are two variables here, that being Devontae Parker and Will Fuller's eventual return to this offense and productivity here at the level that he could potentially play to, that would impact Jaylen Waddle's ability to see a high volume count in this offense, and especially in this passing game, of course. But overall, I feel strongly right now that Jaylen Waddle, based off of how the Buffalo Bills played him defensively here in Week 8, and because of how he's produced and looked to the eye test, not only the way he moves, the way that he can separate from defenders, and then just the raw statistical output that he's put in the box score of various games this season, that he should be in line for some big success the rest of the year, regardless of what wide receivers around him are healthy or aren't moving forward. Waddle this season in his rookie year has 5 games of 8 or more targets, 3 of those being games of 12 plus targets. That is very, very good volume, and something that I didn't even expect to see from Jaylen, especially here in year 1. Waddle's a player who at Alabama, it was no secret. It was very well known that he was a guy who can take the top off defenses. He had some comps thrown out around there between himself and Tyreek Hill because of his ability to stretch the field and make explosive splash plays, and obviously be one-hit home run touchdowns that defenses just simply don't have the speed to keep up with. But what he's produced in the fashion in which he's produced at the NFL level has been a lot less of that and a lot more of the underneath passing game, swinging the ball out to him in the flat, getting him out in space and running with the football, because the Dolphins realize throwing deep isn't necessarily to his strength and not necessarily what he does well. Not that he can't throw the ball deep, but it's definitely not his strong suit. I would say that Tua is more of a cerebral passer, more of an accurate short yardage passer, and someone who can just make the right decision with the football more often than not. And they've used that to their advantage here, realizing that getting Jaylen Waddle out in space with his legs is still just as advantageous at times as getting him those deep shots down the field. So Jalen's been seeing a ton of volume near or just beyond the line of scrimmage, getting catches and then taking it and doing work with his legs after the catch. Waddle was unable to do that here in Week 8, though. Had a down performance despite having 12 targets because he only caught 4 of them. And a large factor of that was that he was shadowed by Tre'Davious White throughout this football game. We saw a little bit of a transition and a switch from that Week 2 contest where Tua eventually was actually knocked out of that game and had to leave. Jacoby Brissett took that game over. But in that performance, Trey White spent a lot more time and gave a lot more attention to Devontae Parker and treated him as the wide receiver 1 for this football team. Whereas here in week 8 that we just had here, Trey White was spending a lot more time on Jaylen Waddle, actually following him around the football field, playing shadow coverage on him, and again, respecting his talent and understanding that he has transitioned to the more prominent threat for this Dolphins passing offense. So that not only shows you that his team and his quarterback are treating him as the number 1 option, but opposing defenses now recognize Jaylen Waddle as this team's top threat in the passing game, despite having potentially Will Fuller back on the field. Devontae Parker was out there this Sunday, and then you've got Mike Gesicki in the passing game as well. So for a player of Waddle's talent, a guy who's, again, seen 5 games with 8+ targets this year and has 3 of those games not only in double-digit targets, but 12 or more of them through 3 games this season, that's impressive territory to be at, and that's something I really like as a buy low wide receiver or a respectable priced player here as we move into the heart of the year and the middle of this fantasy season. For the next part of today's episode, we are joined with a rare Eric sighting here on the SFS channel, and we're very excited and grateful to announce that Manscaped is sponsoring today's episode, and they've hooked us up with some of their best below-the-belt grooming products. They've given us what they call the Perfect Package 4.0. And when heading over to manscaped.com, you can get yourself 20% off and free shipping on all their products using code SIZZLE, which you see up top here, and the link to their website is in the description of today's episode.
Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0, or as we like to call it, the perfect package for your package, includes the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer. It's the safest trimmer I've ever used. It also includes the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant, which is like a simple lotion. It's not offensive. It's not uncomfortable. I love it. Crop Reviver Toner. It's like a ball cologne. That stuff's great. Performance Boxer Briefs. Super comfortable. We were both walking around the apartment with our boxer briefs on, our Manscaped. and a travel bag to hold all of your goodies. They call it the Tool Shed, and it's almost like a Tom Brady football. You see that? It's a pigskin.
Can't even begin to explain the tools I have in my shed. Along beside me is the king of the jungle himself, wielding a Lawnmower 4.0, as I am right here. The Lawnmower 4.0 has cutting-edge technology with a ceramic blade that helps reduce the amounts of nicks and potentially ball-fatal injuries that you can suffer while grooming the boys downstairs. The Lawnmower 4.0 is the perfect tool to make it through the deep and dark jungle down under, as its waterproof technology and light, as you can see here, look at that, helps guide you through all that brush.
The Performance Package 4.0 also includes the Weed Whacker to chop your worst weeds in your nose and ear. This nose and ear hair trimmer uses a 9,000 RPM motor powered 360-degree rotary dual blade system, provide proprietary skin-safe technology. It has to be good, which helps prevent nicks, snags, and tugs in those delicate pockets.
Once again, everybody, go check out manscaped.com. That's 20% off your orders on any of their products and free shipping with the code SIZZLE. That's SIZZLE. And it'll be in the description of today's video as well as the link to their website. So go check out Manscaped. Your balls will thank you, and ours already have. All right, here we go. Jumping back into our next must-buy trade target here for Week 9 action is somebody who definitely used code SIZZLE to get his below-the-belt grooming products for himself in this big NFL breakout year. It's Cordarrelle Patterson of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, you've got yourself a unique dynamic and situation presenting itself with Patterson here, and that's the fact that despite it being at an unassociated position, and now technically Cordarrelle Patterson, if anyone, is the most closely aligned running back to the wide receiver position that we've seen since Ty Montgomery for the Green Bay Packers, in terms of there being these incredibly blurred lines between which position Patterson actually is. But again, Patterson is probably more running back than he is wide receiver. With Calvin Ridley stepping away from football, and for those of you who had not heard that news, Calvin Ridley is taking some time to break for his mental health and to get himself... We don't really know the intimate details of the situation, exactly what's been affecting Ridley and what is ultimately leading to his decision to walk away from the game. But we do know it's a personal matter. There's been no timeline given, no time frame for return. So I'm just going to go out there and assume that, with this indefinitely out status until we hear otherwise, essentially is what that means. Cordarrelle Patterson is now in line, as is every other Atlanta Falcon of significant offensive stature in this offense, in for some level of increased workload. And for Patterson, the fact that that can come in the receiving game because he's had such success in that department as a player for this team in 2021, that is very, very valuable. Myself, basically any other fantasy outlets out there will tell you how incredibly useful having a running back who adds a receiving dynamic to their fantasy outlook is. And Patterson's gotten an opportunity to improve what he already has going for him to a greater extent. We saw him literally line up out wide in one performance this season as an X-level threat at the wide receiver position and score 3 receiving touchdowns. He is very capable of doing this. He could walk out here with Kyle Pitts and man the wide receiver position while still being a fantasy eligible running back and put up great numbers in that fashion, be uber efficient, and get us some really great returns, which he's already doing. But again, because your top wide receiver option, now you can argue whether or not Kyle Pitts or Calvin Ridley is the best offensive weapon for this Falcons offense. That's a different conversation. But your best wide receiver, undoubtedly, Calvin Ridley, is no longer available on the team. And he was seeing double-digit targets almost every week in this offense, or 8+ targets on a frequent week-to-week basis. That's a lot of volume now unlocked here. The Falcons are going to have to strap themselves with the talent they've got, diversify and spread the ball out around the players they do have in-house and ready to suit up for football games every week. That could mean that you're going to see Mike Davis run the football more than he has been since Patterson's Week 2 breakout, and you're going to see Patterson's snap count really overall increase, because when he's not lined up in the backfield, he is going to be lined up as a wide receiver, as a split-out wide option. And then you're also going to see Mike Davis back there in the backfield, because, again, the Falcons could look at this from a situation that they think personnel-wise they're better off, I should say, with Davis and Patterson both on the field, but serving separate purposes for the productivity that this offense is receiving from each of them. So we already know Patterson's going to get some ground opportunities and get some rushing workload every week. We saw that be a part of his fantasy outlook, and clearly this is the best fantasy season Cordarrelle Patterson has ever had. But going back to his days in New England as a Patriot a few years back, Bill Belichick and this offense started to use him as a rushing threat. We then saw that transition to Chicago, where Matt Nagy used him in that fashion, and now here in Atlanta. So a super versatile, super dynamic player. I think that he could further, again, increase his ceiling. He had a touchdown this week, had a productive outing outside of the rushing department, and was able to put up respectable numbers, but not someone who had a crazy boom week and thus would have too steep of a price to offer for. I'd go out and test the market for Cordarrelle Patterson here. I think long-term the upside is great. Again, you never know. Calvin Ridley could walk back in the door at any point in time, but Patterson's value as it is today, without the potential for increased production, increased volume, and productivity here, is already great as is, and something I would already be looking to take advantage of. So this just adds more. It adds an extra element of a cherry on top to your fantasy situation for him this year. Diontae Johnson. This is another one I've been very, very adamant all season long. You got to go out and buy Diontae Johnson if you have the chance. There are very few players on a week-to-week basis who have the target volume that Diontae has in this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, who have the safety and the floor net he provides to you. He can literally win routes at any level of a defense, be used in any fashion for this Pittsburgh offense, and he is just an overall target magnet for Big Ben Roethlisberger. Whatever it is about Diontae Johnson, whether it's his skill set, the rapport they have off the field, the chemistry they've got between one another, they just click, and Big Ben throws him the football over and over and over again. Diontae's got 10 or more targets in 5 out of his 6 games he suited up for this season. He had one game, it was a little bit of a blunder, only saw a couple of targets, didn't have too much productivity, but outside of that, it has been very, very, very safe floor numbers, very reliable production from Diontae, and again, this week was a great representation of what Diontae Johnson is. We saw him have a 50-yard reception. We saw him also do a lot of work at the line of scrimmage and catch short balls and take him for a few yards after the catch and just be a volume possession receiver. But that volume possession role in this offense in PPR formats is giving you such dependable floor numbers on a week-to-week basis. If he is able to get a deep shot downfield, connect with Big Ben on one of those opportunities, if he's able to find the end zone, the potential you have for production here is so great. This is such a complete player. He can be relied on every single week as a solid and consistent wide receiver 2 performer who will give you some top 12 wide receiver points and obviously the opportunity to have that productivity in your offense or in your fantasy lineups, that is, rather, on occasion. So Diontae Johnson, someone I absolutely love this season. If there was such a thing as a league-winning floor play, I would say that Diontae Johnson could be considered in that category of players because similar to guys like a Keenan Allen last year, where you felt that every single week there wasn't a chance that you had to worry about him having a bust performance. Now, again, he is 5 for 6, so he did have one game where he wasn't exactly up to the rest of his performances. Diontae will be just fine, though. He's a player who is uber dependable. I would have no issues other than potentially him getting injured about him missing a week's mark for where he should get at in terms of points produced. Him and Najee Harris are the focal points, the centerpieces of this offense, and that is not changing regardless of what talent's around them. He's been getting it done with both Chase Claypool, and while Juju was healthy this season, he was getting the job done with both of them on the field as well. He gets his volume, he gets his numbers. It's just a given and something that's factored into a situation every week, and you don't have to leave yourself wondering what's going to be his outlook on a weekly basis. All right, and then just like Diontae Johnson here at our first non-wide receiver or running back trade target for this week, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles, the current QB3, is another player I'm looking to go out and buy after this down performance. Now, because he is the QB3, because if you take a close look at the overall body of work and productivity he's put together this season, he's been such a fantastic play. It's probably going to require a respectable level of trade assets to go out and get him for your teams. But I'm not panicking at all about this anomaly of a week that we had here in week number 8. He's going to be just fine. You look at the fact that he had only 103 yards passing, no passing touchdowns. You look at his rushing total, 7 carries for 71 yards, which, by the way, Jalen Hurts is a player who I'm not going to compare him as a passer to Deshaun Watson, but when he gets outside the pocket and how he breaks tackles and evades edge rushers inside of the pocket and bailing outside, gets out in space, it's very Deshaun Watson-esque in terms of the confidence and the amount of swagger he has, whether it's high stepping and whatever you want to call that move that it is that he used to juke out defenders and evade them when getting out in space. Jalen Hurts is awesome to watch. I like watching him more as a rusher than I do as a passer, but nonetheless, that's besides the point. This is a great fantasy situation. He has put up 20 or more fantasy points in every game outside of this Week 8 performance against the Lions. And a lot of that comes down to, again, this game is an anomaly and a fluke in terms of the fantasy scoring that Jalen Hurts had. The reason he's such a safe play in terms of his floor value on a week-to-week basis is because of what he adds with his legs on top of the passing game. He had no touchdowns, passing or rushing in this contest. That's automatically a point productivity killer for any position, especially at the quarterback position. When in standard quarterback scoring, you're only getting 1 point for every 25 yards passing, instead of leagues where you're getting a whole point for just 10 yards. So quarterbacks in the yardage department, just on average, are racking up points 2.5 times as slowly as other positions in fantasy or wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. So they've already got that disadvantage. And then you add in the fact that he doesn't have a single touchdown to boost that production Obviously, his numbers are going to be down, only has 11 points. The anomaly and the fluke part of this situation for Week 8 comes from the fact that the Eagles had 4 rushing touchdowns, none of which were by Jalen Hurts. You got 2 to Boston Scott on the goal line, and 2 to Jordan Howard, who was just activated and has made our must-add players list for this week. Go check out that video if you haven't done so already. Those 2 players vultured up all 4 of the Eagles' rushing touchdowns. Even just one of those touchdowns on the ground would have made Jalen Hurts' numbers look a heck of a lot better for this week. But because his point total was so much lower than any other game so far this season, there could be an element of a buy low dynamic for fantasy managers looking to improve at the quarterback spot this week. So although Jalen Hurts is not the most efficient passer, not the most accurate passer, refined, whatever you want to call it, he's not the most productive player in that fast of things either. He's still a player I trust going forward to add on top enough value to his passing game with his legs and his rushing totals that he is going to continue to be a top quarterback in fantasy the rest of the season, and he'll continue to reflect great numbers and production in his week-to-week games as a result. So not panicking on Jalen Hurts here, going out and trading for him rather. Obviously, if you're a Hurts owner, hold him here and don't look to move off of him. Moving back into the running back position now with Nick Chubb for the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, a lot of fantasy managers out there were expecting more from him in his return, and we're pretty desperate for points and productivity coming off of him missing the last couple of games here. But take a deep breath. I'm not too shocked that Nick Chubb's production was as low as it was and was as underwhelming as it was here in Week 8 against Pittsburgh. This was a low-scoring game, 15-10. Not a lot of points put up on the board by either side. This was a nitty-gritty in-division game where you're looking at cold weather, defense wins the football game, not overly efficient productivity from either side. And Nick Chubb in his first game back off a calf injury, we saw the level of caution that was on display from Kevin Stefanski and his staff with how many touches and opportunities they were going to give Nick Chubb when deploying him back into this offense. Now, Chubb was a lot less efficient than he usually is on a per-game basis. Again, that goes back to the nature of this football game as a whole. But Diontae Johnson, the classic Cleveland Browns running back killer, the Nick Chubb killer really, because it hasn't been too much of a factor for Kareem Hunt or Diontae Johnson, who is just broken out last week on Thursday Night Football with obviously him showing he can play and get the job done. Nick Chubb has been the victim, the very sad victim, of countless touchdown vultures from Kareem Hunt until he was injured, and now Diontae Johnson, who stole his rushing touchdown again this week. So Chubb's fantasy dynamic and outlook is immediately changed when you're looking at, and Chubb, we know who he is at this point. He's not a player that catches passes and does dynamic point production for our fantasy lineups. He is solely an efficient rusher who can find the end zone and rack up a ton of yards on the ground. That's what we expect from him on a week-to-week basis. So when he has 60 rushing yards and adds the touchdown on top, 12 points still isn't a marker or a margin that you're feeling great about, but you're still feeling a lot better about 12 than you are about 6. And just because he didn't reach the end zone, that's the difference between those 2 point totals. Because again, as opposed to an Austin Eckler or a DeAndre Swift, who are also getting the job done on the ground, but adding an elite dynamic and level of production through the air, that's the value they give you in that sense. Chubb doesn't have that. And so when he doesn't find the end zone, when he doesn't have his most efficient day, these are kind of the uglier numbers that we're left with. So he did have 1 catch, 8 yards, still not overly enough to get the job done. Again, in half PPR scoring, you're looking at 6.5 points from him this week. So going forward, the thing I like about Nick Chubb is I think that with Kareem Hunt out of the lineup, as Chubb continues to progress through this calf injury and get back and closer to 100% health, I think there's less of a chance that we see Diontae Johnson vulturing these plays, more of a chance that maybe Nick Chubb has some involvement in the passing game, maybe still not a super high workload, but maybe he sees 3 targets per game instead of 1 or 2. That can be the slight difference in uptick here that makes him worth a buy right now. I think that Chubb is a player who inevitably at this point is in PPR formats a lower end RB1, and we've seen in matchups like here in Week 8, if he doesn't find the end zone, doesn't have a big rush, he might not even put up RB1 numbers. But while we're so desperate at the running back position for bodies to put in our fantasy lineups, even just covering 2 running back slots in a fantasy lineup sometimes feels like a tall task if you haven't drafted properly and assessed the depth that you need to have on your fantasy rosters. Going out, buying a Nick Chubb low right now, if you can find a panicking fantasy owner. Again, this might be a name that's harder to acquire in some leagues depending on your league's trade culture, but Nick Chubb is at least worth making an offer for here and seeing if you can buy him lower here in week 9. And then if he is able to capitalize on the lack of touchdown vulturing from Kareem Hunt up until his return, if he is able to turn things around and increase his value, maybe right before that fantasy trade deadline, you flip him again for a name you like even better down the stretch, and that works out for you in that sense of things. Next up, DeAndre Swift here. So we just touched on him a second ago while talking about Nick Chubb, who's coming off of one of his worst games of this year. DeAndre Swift is also a player who is coming off his worst game of this fantasy season with just 4.5 points in half PPR scoring produced. Now, he did lose a fumble. That's an automatic deduction of 2 points in standard scoring fantasy leagues. Now, some leagues out there don't have penalties for interceptions, lost fumbles, and all that stuff, but the majority of you guys out there have that, so that is something that was factored into his matchup here. Swift, plain and simple, just did not get the job done this week. He wasn't able to be efficient enough with the touches he was given, which was a healthy workload and about what he sees on a regular week-to-week basis. He was out there for 90% of the snaps. Jamal Williams was out with injury, so that obviously led to an increased snap load for Swift. But again, this Lions team was just not able to put up points as a whole, and they were shut out for the majority of this football game and didn't really get things moving until garbage time, and by then it was far, far too late. So Swift comes out here, puts up points on a week-to-week basis as a high upside running back 1 in PPR formats. At this point, that's what Swift is. He is a top 12 fantasy running back. He is a player who, in a given week, can produce top 5 running back numbers for that week specifically. He's awesome. He's got all the traits you look for in a dynamic workhorse running back. While he is splitting touches and carries and even reception opportunities with Jamal Williams, he's shown that more often than not, and this week was a rare case where that wasn't the situation, even in bad losses that the Lions have this year, where game script does not favor running backs in traditional fantasy scoring outlooks, Swift's able to overcome that because the value he gives you as a receiving back is so much more than what he provides to you as a rusher. He's a respectable threat in the rushing game for this Lions offense, but really the best value he can return as a rusher is simple goal line carries for this Detroit Lions offense. Everything else you're looking at as an explosive play out of the backfield, catching balls and getting out in space and making people miss and getting explosive yards in that phase. So Swift's a player I have a lot of faith in the rest of this season. I'm not going to worry too much about one game because, again, I trust that more often than not, because of what he's shown us so far this season, even when he gets these bad game scripts, even when the Lions are down big late in the games, he's still shown the ability to come out and produce quality numbers and even give you great upside on a weekly basis. So, again, going back to Nick Chubb, these players are probably the 2 toughest to go out and trade for on today's list, but it's very, very worth it if you can go out there and toss an offer. There's a lot of situations, a lot of leagues where players are going to panic and they're going to move off of players in rash reaction to what happened in one individual fantasy situation, 1 week. I know that's not all of you. I know that there's going to be a lot of people out there who are very smart fantasy players, and you're not going to be able to pry these players away from other teams for a fortune. But it's worth sending an offer. Get the trade offer out there. You never know what will happen in your leagues. And then finally here, Chase Claypool for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is obviously one where Chase Claypool has not been consistent this year. He hasn't quite lived up to the year 2 steps of growth we expected of him this season. And I think that there are multiple factors contributing to that. Obviously, first and foremost, the most detrimental aspect of his fantasy situation is the quarterback play with Big Ben Roethlisberger. And I think the lack of downfield and vertical passing attempts in this offense is what has kept Chase Claypool from reaching the fantasy ascension that when you look at his prospective numbers that he could be producing with the speed, the size, the athletic ability he has, Big Ben has held him back a lot more than I think that some of us realize. And For those of us who have watched the Pittsburgh Steelers this year, it's been very evident. Big Ben, dink and dunk, short yards. That's why we love Diontae Johnson so much this season, because he's a lot more suited to catch passes underneath and make defenders miss out in space, because he is a lot smaller. He's a lot quicker and shiftier. Not faster necessarily. I think that straight line speed, Diontae Johnson might actually be slower than Chase Claypool. But out in space, that's a player who is more suited for that style of offense. Chase Claypool, to me, though, is still worth a buy right now because he still has those traits. Because even though we haven't seen him be near Diontae Johnson's target load, he is still evidently the number 2 option in this passing game. The upside you're getting here in trading for Chase Claypool is what it's all about. You're not getting a safe fantasy floor. I'll be upfront and foremost about that. That's not the situation. Chase Claypool is solely a high upside pick that could potentially boom for you late in the season. We're seeing other young wide receivers do it right now. Look at a Michael Pittman, who had 2 high target games early on in the season. His numbers were pretty down after that, and then he comes out here in Week 8 and has the best game of his life against the Tennessee Titans in Week 8, showing that he can go out there, win jump balls, dominate wide receivers from cornerbacks from a physical standpoint at the point of attack and at the catch point. Chase Claypool is a very similar player. He has the intangibles. He has the tools he needs. He just hasn't been put in the right situations to do so. It's a risk. It's a gamble. Some of you aren't going to like this one. I totally understand that. If you don't want to go out there and offer assets to get a player like Chase Claypool in return, that's fine. But for me personally, the shares I have of Chase Claypool, he doesn't have enough value to move off of him for a player better. And I'm holding on the hope and on the standpoint, the belief that I think that there's a chance he still gets this thing going like he did last year. Because even in 2020, he was getting more vertical passing attempts. He was getting shots taken from Big Ben Roethlisberger downfield, and they were connecting, making explosive plays happen, and Chase Claypool was showing us the potential he has. He hasn't quite had the same level of opportunity in this season that he did last, but with Juju Smith-Schuster out, there is still more opportunities and volume in this passing game to be had. There's still more workload to be soaked up here. In a game I thought he'd be very productive against the Browns, it was overall a very low output and very low scoring game for both sides collectively. So I've still got hope for Chase Claypool moving forward here. I think it's a very great opportunity to buy a whole lot of upside for not a whole lot of price. If you've got the right pieces, if you've got the right situation in your leagues and you can afford to give up a little bit here, Chase Claypool is someone that I am in favor of going and moving for here in Week 9. All right, those are our trade targets here for Week 9 fantasy football action. Again, if you guys have questions regarding your individual teams and leagues, your trades, drop those in the comment section below. We'll get to as many of you as possible. But since we're posting new videos every day and since we're coming out with a ton of content here, we're probably not going to be able to get to each and every single one of you as we post throughout the week. So if you want guaranteed responses, check out SFS Gold. That's how you get access to our personal and private DMs in the community Discord server, and that'll get you set up with those guaranteed responses. But again, we can only get to as many of you in the comment section of our YouTube videos as we've got time for, and we've got a pretty busy week coming up here. So thank you all so much for tuning in to today's video. We will see you guys next time. Peace out.